Footsteps echoed through the empty marble terminal, but Camille knew she wasn't alone. Her flight to London boarded in 10 minutes, yet the towering silhouette blocking the gate meant she was never leaving. He stepped into the light, eyes cold, jaw clenched, staring directly at her slightly rounded stomach. Footfalls, heavy and deliberate, cut through the ambient hum of Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. It was past midnight at the private aviation terminal, a secluded wing reserved for billionaires and ghosts. Camille Hayes was desperately trying to be the latter. Clutching a sleek leather tote bag against her trench coat, she kept her head down. She was a striking black woman, usually poised and commanding in tailored designer suits, orchestrating million-dollar acquisitions. Tonight, however, she was running for her life. Beneath the expensive fabric of her coat lay a secret that had fundamentally altered her reality. A 12-week pregnancy that tied her forever to the most dangerous man in the Midwest. Arthur Kingston, born in Seoul but raised in the brutal, unforgiving underground of Chicago's West Side, Arthur had built a legitimate corporate empire, Kingston Global, to mask a sprawling, deeply entrenched Korean syndicate. He was the undisputed boss, a ghost to the feds, and a nightmare to his rivals. To the public, he was a ruthless, sharp-jawed CEO who wore bespoke Tom Ford suits and spoke with a smooth, terrifying calm. To Camille, his executive secretary for 3 years, he had been an enigma she foolishly thought she could handle. 6 months ago, the strictly professional boundary between them had shattered after a high-stakes merger celebration at the Drake Hotel. The champagne, the adrenaline, the magnetic pull they had ignored for years, it all culminated in a night of reckless, consuming passion. It wasn't a one-time slip. It became an addiction. But last week, everything shattered. Camille hadn't just discovered she was carrying his child. She had accidentally intercepted a decrypted manifest on his private server. It wasn't just corporate espionage. It was a kill order. Arthur had ordered the assassination of Senator Thomas Wright, a real-life power broker whose sudden heart attack had shocked the nation just 3 days prior. Camille handed her forged passport to the private concierge. Her new name was printed crisply on the page. Just a few more minutes, and she would be over the Atlantic, disappearing into the winding streets of London, far away from the blood-soaked empire of Arthur Kingston. Miss Hayes. A voice purred from the shadows. The passport slipped from her trembling fingers, hitting the marble floor with a soft slap. Camille turned slowly. The private concierge had vanished, replaced by 2 massive men in dark suits who seamlessly locked the terminal doors. But Camille didn't look at them. Her gaze was locked on the man stepping out of the VIP lounge's dim lighting. Arthur. He was impeccably dressed, as always, in a dark charcoal suit, but the relaxed, predatory grace in his stride made her blood run cold. His dark eyes, sharp and unreadable, swept over her trembling form before locking intensely onto her midsection. "Going somewhere, Camille?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that sent a shiver down her spine. "Arthur," she breathed, forcing her voice to stay steady. "You shouldn't be here. I resigned. I left the paperwork on your desk." "I saw," he replied, taking a slow step closer. The sheer magnetic force of his presence seemed to suck the oxygen out of the cavernous room. A 2-week notice would have been standard, but a midnight flight to London under a fake name? That feels personal. "I need a fresh start," she lied, taking a step back until her shoulders hit the concierge desk. "You know I've always wanted to live in Europe. The corporate life. It's burning me out." Arthur stopped mere inches from her. He reached out, his knuckles brushing the lapel of her trench coat. The touch was agonizingly gentle, entirely at odds with the violent world he commanded. "A fresh start," he murmured, his gaze flicking up to meet her terrified, beautiful brown eyes. "Is that what you call running away with my heir?" Camille's heart stopped. She stopped breathing. How could he know? She hadn't told a soul. She had paid in cash at a clinic 3 towns over. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered, shaking her head. Arthur's hand slid down, resting firmly over the buttons of her coat, directly over her womb. The possessiveness in his touch made her gasp. He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "Stop lying to me, Camille," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly intimate whisper. "Like it or not, you're staying. I know that baby is mine." Before she could scream, before she could run, His men stepped forward. Arthur effortlessly swept her off her feet, ignoring her frantic struggles and the fists beating against his chest. He carried her out to the waiting line of black armored SUVs on the tarmac. The cold Chicago wind whipped around them, but Camille felt only the suffocating heat of Arthur's grip. She had tried to escape the devil, but he had merely clipped her wings. The penthouse at the Waldorf Astoria was a gilded cage suspended 50 stories above the glittering Chicago skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a city that Arthur owned. Camille stood by the glass, her arms wrapped protectively around her stomach. It had been 48 hours since Arthur dragged her from the airport. 48 hours of locked doors, private chefs bringing untouched meals, and a heavy, suffocating silence. Arthur had given her space, sleeping in the guest wing, but the perimeter of the penthouse was guarded by his most lethal enforcers. The heavy mahogany door clicked open. Arthur walked in, loosening his silk tie, looking exhausted but fiercely alert. He poured himself a glass of amber scotch from the crystal decanter on the bar cart and turned to face her. "You haven't eaten the salmon," he noted, gesturing to the silver tray on the dining table. "You need omega, 3S. Dr. Harrison was very specific. Camille spun around, her eyes flashing with pure fury. "Dr. Harrison? You bribed my doctor?" "I don't bribe people, Camille. I own the board of directors at St. Jude's Medical," Arthur said flatly, taking a slow sip of his drink. "When my executive secretary, who has been mysteriously nauseous for a month, pays cash for an ultrasound under a pseudonym, red flags are raised. I was notified before you even left the parking lot." "You have no right," Camille spat, pacing toward him. The fear she felt at the airport was rapidly being replaced by the fierce, protective anger of a mother. "You have no right to track me, to hold me here. I won't let my child grow up in a Mafia stronghold. I won't let my baby become a target for your enemies." Arthur's eyes darkened. He set the glass down with a sharp clack that made her flinch. In 2 strides, he crossed the room, trapping her between his solid frame and the heavy oak dining table. "You think you're a prisoner here?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "You think I brought you back just to lock you away for my own amusement?" "Yes," she yelled back, her chest heaving. "Because you're a monster, Arthur. I saw the encrypted files. I saw the ledger. I know you ordered the hit on Senator Wright." Silence descended on the room, heavy and absolute. Camille squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the blow. She had admitted to seeing the forbidden files, a crime in Arthur's world, punishable only by death. Instead of anger, a low, humorless laugh escaped Arthur's chest. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a sleek, silver USB drive. He tossed it onto the table between them. "You mean this ledger?" he asked softly. Camille opened her eyes, staring at the drive. "How?" "I took that. I had it in my bag." "You took a decoy, Camille," Arthur said, reaching out to gently tuck a stray curl behind her ear. His touch was warm, sending a treacherous jolt of electricity through her veins. "Did you really think my private, heavily encrypted terminal could be bypassed by a secretary with a basic administrative password? I let you download it." Camille's mind reeled. "Why?" Arthur's expression turned grim. "Because there's a mole in my organization. Someone has been feeding information to the Irish faction on the South Side, the Sullivan family. They've been trying to find the link between Kingston Global and Senator Wright's death to blackmail me. I planted that fake ledger to see who would take the bait. I expected my head of security to take it. I expected my CFO. I didn't expect the woman sleeping in my bed to steal it." Camille felt the floor tilt beneath her. I I only looked because I was looking for a way out, Arthur. Once I found out I was pregnant, I needed to know exactly how dangerous you were. I didn't give it to anyone." "I know you didn't," Arthur said, his hands moving to grip her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. "But Liam Sullivan doesn't know that." He pulled out his phone, swiped a few times, and held the screen up for her to see. The video footage was in black and white, time-stamped just 2 hours after Camille had left for the airport. It showed her cozy, upscale apartment in Lincoln Park. Suddenly, the front door was kicked off its hinges. 4 heavily armed men in tactical gear swarmed the apartment, ripping open mattresses, smashing drywall, and tearing the place to absolute shreds. Camille gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Sullivan's men," Arthur said grimly. They caught wind that my executive secretary suddenly packed up and made a run for the airport. In their minds, you're the mole. They think you have the real ledger, and they were going to intercept you in London, torture you for the files, and leave your body in the Thames. Tears welled in Camille's eyes as the reality of the situation crashed over her. The man she thought was her captor had just saved her life. I wasn't keeping you from leaving because I want to control you, Camille, Arthur whispered, pressing his forehead against hers. The raw vulnerability in the Mafia boss's voice broke her heart. I brought you back because it's the only way to keep you and our baby breathing. As long as you are in this tower, my men will slaughter anyone who tries to touch you. Camille stared up into his dark, tortured eyes. The lines between hero and villain, captor and savior, were blurring so fast she felt dizzy. So what now? She whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. I just stay locked in this tower forever? No, Arthur said, his jaw setting into a ruthless line as he pulled her into a fiercely protective embrace. You stay here until I wipe the Sullivan family off the face of the earth. Just as Arthur's lips brushed against hers, sealing a bloody promise, his phone vibrated violently on the table. Arthur pulled away, annoyed, and glanced at the screen. All the color drained from his face. Camille felt a spike of panic. Arthur? What is it? He slowly looked up at her, his eyes hollow. That was my head of security, the men guarding the lobby. They're dead. Sullivan didn't wait for us to make a move. He's in the building. Gunfire shattered the heavy oak double doors of the penthouse, the deafening roar of automatic weapons ripping through the opulent silence. Splinters of ancient wood, chunks of drywall, and fragments of priceless artwork exploded into the room, raining down on the imported Persian rugs. Gabriel Kingston didn't flinch. In a fraction of a second, the polished corporate CEO vanished completely. In his place stood the lethal, calculating syndicate boss who had violently clawed his way up from the unforgiving streets of the West Side. He shoved Camille hard behind the massive, solid marble structure of the kitchen island, his broad body instinctively curling over hers to shield her as a barrage of bullets chewed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The glittering, panoramic view of the Chicago skyline instantly became a terrifying backdrop of falling, shattered glass cascading 50 stories down. Keep your head down, keep your hands over your ears, and do not move unless I tell you to, Gabriel ordered. His voice was a frighteningly calm anchor in the center of the absolute chaos. He reached under the edge of the marble countertop, his hand blindly finding a biometric scanner seamlessly integrated into the stonework. A panel slid open with a soft hydraulic hiss, revealing a matte black tactical lockbox. He pulled out 2 suppressed Glock 19s and 4 spare magazines, his movements ruthlessly efficient and practiced. He chambered around in each with a sharp double click that cut through the ringing in Camille's ears. Camille crouched low on the hardwood floor, her hands instinctively cradling her stomach. The fear was certainly there, sharp, metallic, and heavy in her throat. But as she listened to the boots crunching over the broken glass in the foyer, something else began to happen. The terror began to recede, replaced by a strange crystalline clarity. She was tired of running. She was tired of being the prey in a world run by violent men. She closed her eyes, taking one deep, grounding breath, centering herself for the storm she had meticulously orchestrated. Heavy combat boots advanced into the massive living room. The Sullivans' hitmen were officially inside, fanning out with tactical precision. Gabriel leaned smoothly around the edge of the marble island, raising his weapon. 2 muffled thwips cut through the air, followed immediately by the heavy, lifeless thuds of 2 bodies hitting the floor. But more footsteps were already rushing down the corridor, laying down, suppressing fire that chipped away at their marble cover. Suddenly, the penthouse's emergency lockdown protocols engaged. The main overhead lights cut out entirely, plunging the sprawling room into pitch blackness for a split second before being replaced by blaring high-intensity security strobes. The blinding white flashes strobed down the hallway in a rapid-fire sequence. To Camille, the violent, rhythmic flashing felt exactly like looking through the viewfinder of a camera operating in continuous burst mode, freezing the horrific, advancing action of the gunmen into a series of stark, high-contrast snapshots. We can't hold them here indefinitely, Gabriel stated, ejecting an empty magazine and slamming a fresh one home in the strobe-lit darkness. They've jammed the primary elevators and locked the stairwell doors, but I have a private freight lift hidden behind the wine cellar. It drops straight into the subterranean garage. We move on three. They'll be waiting at the bottom, Camille said, her voice surprisingly steady, lacking any trace of the hysterics he expected. Gabriel paused, his dark eyes locking onto hers in the chaotic, flashing light. He noted the sheer absence of panic in her posture, the rigid set of her jaw. I know, but we take the fight to them on our terms, or we die in this cage. Are you ready? She nodded, her eyes hardening. Go. Gabriel moved with the predatory grace of a phantom. He stepped out from behind the island, laying down a relentless wave of suppressing fire that forced the Irish mobsters to scramble for cover behind the shredded, bullet-riddled designer sofas. Taking the split-second opening, he grabbed Camille's hand, pulling her tight against his side as they sprinted toward the heavy mahogany doors of the climate-controlled wine cellar at the back of the penthouse. A stray bullet whizzed past them, shattering a vintage $10,000 bottle of Bordeaux just inches from Camille's head. The heavy liquid showered them in deep red wine that looked and smelled terrifyingly like blood. Gabriel spun flawlessly on his heel, firing a single fatal shot into the chest of the advancing shooter before violently kicking the cellar door shut and throwing the heavy steel deadbolt into place. The silence inside the insulated cellar was jarring. The thick walls muffled the sounds of the surviving men desperately trying to ram the door. Gabriel didn't waste a second. He moved to the back wall, pressing his palm against what looked like a blank stretch of concrete. A hidden seam split open, revealing a stark, industrial steel elevator carriage. They stepped inside, and Gabriel hit the lowest button. The heavy doors slid shut, sealing them in. The descent was agonizingly slow, the mechanical, grinding hum of the gears contrasting wildly with the violent adrenaline surging through their veins. Gabriel stood in front of her, his shoulders tense, his gun still raised, ready to slaughter whatever waited for them in the garage. Gabriel, Camille said softly in the dim, flickering light of the carriage. He stiffened slightly. She had never called him Gabriel. To her, to the corporate world, he was always Mr. Kingston. Gabriel was the name reserved for the shadows, for the ruthless underworld boss. The fact that she used it now, so effortlessly, shifted the dynamic in the tiny metal box. If Liam Sullivan is waiting for us down there, she continued, her tone authoritative and calm, you need to let me do the talking. He frowned deeply, his jaw tightening as he looked back at her over his shoulder. Absolutely not. You stay behind me. I'm not letting Liam get within 10 feet of you or our child. I will handle him. You don't understand, Camille insisted. She stepped forward, gently but firmly pushing his gun arm down. Her brown eyes flashed with a fierce, brilliant intensity that caught him completely off guard. The subservient, quiet, professional secretary he had known and protected for 3 years was entirely gone. In her place stood a woman radiating quiet, absolute, terrifying power. You thought I stole that ledger because I was scared, she told him, her voice echoing off the steel walls. You thought I was a liability, just another civilian caught in your crossfire. I wasn't running from Liam Sullivan, Gabriel. I was finishing him. Before he could demand an explanation, before he could process the sheer weight of the confession hanging in the air, the elevator jolted to a harsh, metallic halt. The heavy steel doors began to slide open, letting in the cold, damp air of the subterranean parking garage. They were not alone. The expansive, concrete garage was swarming with men. At the center of the heavily armed blockade stood Liam Sullivan, a broad-shouldered man with a scarred jaw and a vicious, triumphant smirk. His men immediately raised their rifles, dozens of laser sights painting red dots across Gabriel's chest. Gabriel stepped out of the elevator, pushing Camille slightly behind him, his Glocks raised but useless against overwhelming odds. End of the line, Kingston, Liam echoed, his voice bouncing off the concrete pillars. I have to admit, I didn't think the great king of Chicago would fall because of a skirt. Hand over the girl and the ledger she stole, and I'll make your death quick. Otherwise, I'll make you watch what we do to her before I blow your brains out. Gabriel's finger tightened on the trigger, prepared to die, taking Liam with him, when a hand gently pushed his arm down. Camille stepped out from behind his broad frame. She smoothed the lapels of her trench coat, her posture impeccably straight, her chin held high in absolute defiance. You're looking for the ledger, Liam? Camille asked, her voice echoing with a cold, mocking authority. The one containing the financial lifeblood of the Sullivan Syndicate, the offshore accounts, the dummy corporations, the blackmail files on the state judges. Liam's smirk faltered slightly, his eyes narrowing at the black woman, who was supposed to be cowering in fear. Careful, sweetheart. You're holding property that doesn't belong to you. Hand the flash drive over. I don't have it, Camille said smoothly. Because it was never a ledger. It was a Trojan horse. Silence fell over the garage. Gabriel looked at Camille, his mind racing as he finally saw the puzzle pieces snapping together. The hidden identity she had kept buried beneath her secretarial facade. You see, Liam, Camille continued, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. 5 years ago, you ordered a hit on a small community credit union in the South Side to cover up your money laundering tracks. The collateral damage of that fire was the branch manager, my father. Liam's face drained of color. For 3 years, I played the perfect executive secretary at Kingston Global, she said, her voice ringing with poetic justice. I learned the ins and outs of syndicate financing. I watched Gabriel. I learned how the underworld breathes. But most importantly, I learned how desperate you were to find a weakness in his armor. So, I created one. She reached into her coat pocket, but instead of a weapon, she pulled out a sleek smartphone. When your mole, Gabriel's CFO, by the way, you should really pick more loyal spies, intercepted the ledger I deliberately planted. He plugged it into your private mainframe to verify the files, Camille explained, a dangerous smile touching her lips. The moment he did, my malware bypassed your firewalls. You didn't download Gabriel's financial history, Liam. You downloaded a mirror protocol that gave me absolute control over yours. You're bluffing, Liam snarled, though a bead of sweat rolled down his scarred temple. Shoot them! Check your phone, Liam, Camille commanded, her voice cracking like a whip. Hesitantly, Liam pulled his phone from his pocket. The screen was flooded with encrypted alerts. I didn't just drain your accounts, Camille whispered, delivering the final crushing blow. I liquidated your assets. The 60 million in the Cayman Islands? Gone. Distributed to 36 community outreach programs and underfunded hospitals in the West Side and South Side. The judges you were blackmailing? I sent the unredacted proof to the FBI Cybercrimes Division 10 minutes ago. Your empire isn't just bankrupt, Liam. It's public. Liam stared at his screen in absolute horror. Social accountability had finally come for the untouchable boss, brought down by a woman he had severely underestimated. You bitch, Liam roared, raising his gun. Bang. Liam's gun dropped to the concrete. He fell to his knees, clutching his shoulder, howling in pain. Gabriel stood with his Glock smoking, his eyes completely black with murderous intent. Suddenly, the screech of tires echoed down the ramp. 4 heavily armored SUVs smashed through the garage gates, blocking the exits. Dozens of Gabriel's men poured out, heavily armed and outnumbering the remaining, deeply confused Irish mobsters. With their boss ruined and bleeding on the floor, Liam's men dropped their weapons without firing a single shot. Gabriel lowered his gun. He turned to Camille, staring at her as if seeing her for the very first time. She wasn't just a civilian caught in his crossfire. She was a brilliant, ruthless tactician who had orchestrated the downfall of his greatest rival without firing a single bullet. She was a queen worthy of an empire. You took down the Sullivan family, Gabriel murmured, stepping close to her, ignoring the chaos of his men securing the prisoners. You used my network to wage a silent war, and you won. Camille looked up at him, the adrenaline fading, leaving her suddenly exhausted. I had to protect myself. And now, I have to protect our child. I couldn't let him be born into a world where Liam Sullivan was hunting us. Gabriel's rough hands reached up, framing her face. The possessiveness in his touch was no longer just about ownership. It was anchored in profound, absolute reverence. You don't ever have to run again, Camille. No one will ever touch you. No one will ever touch our child. He pulled her into a fierce, desperate kiss, sealing a bond forged in fire, blood, and shadows. When he finally pulled back, he reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a sleek, embossed leather folder pressing it gently into her hands. Camille opened it. Inside were first-class tickets, secured under ironclad aliases, and a beautifully detailed dossier. "What is this?" she asked, breathless. "An itinerary," Gabriel said softly, wrapping his arm protectively around her waist as he led her toward an awaiting armored car. A secluded coastal villa in the Amalfi Coast, followed by a private chalet in the Swiss Alps. Every car, every meal, every security detail has been flawlessly planned, booked, and managed by my top fixers. You won't have to lift a finger, look at a calendar, or schedule a single thing. We are going everywhere you have ever wanted to go. Camila leaned her head against his shoulder, a genuine, radiant smile breaking through Latour exhaustion as they walked out of the shadows and into the dawn. What a breathtaking finale. Camille proved she is far from just a secretary, pulling off the ultimate power move to protect her baby and claim her place beside Gabriel. Did you see that massive twist coming? If you loved this intense, high stakes mafia romance full of poetic justice and fierce loyalty, hit that like button right now. Share this story with your friends who love a brilliant, unstoppable heroine. And make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next thrilling drama. See you in the next video.